Hello, good evening. Welcome to another Classic Comics livecast. Hope you're all having a good weekend. It's been a long one for me, but I'm muddling through. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So, what do we got? So, tonight I'll be looking at some stories on Disney and their box office failures so far this year. Uh, there's a feminist remake of Narnia, of the Narnia stories coming. Um, if you can believe that, can hardly wait. And let's see, what else have we got? Let me bring this up. So James Mangold, so the director of Indiana Jones, he's had a few things to say. I'll talk about that a little. And what else? Jonathan Majors. If we have time, I don't know if I'll have time, but I'll try to get to that. And let's see, maybe talk a little about the Actors Union. They may be going on strike. And let me see, what else is there? Maybe talk a little about the Batman. So I think the Batman, Matt Reeves is wanting to do a Batman sort of verse for DC, which will be based around his version of Batman, the Pattinson Batman. Just don't know what to make of that, and a few other things. Let me bring that up. But let's go ahead and we'll start with Disney and their rather awful, no good, horrible, very bad year so far. And I do want to thank everyone who is tuning in to listen to the stream, both during the stream and on a rewatch. Okay, so this is from Variety. And by the way, I'll probably make this a fairly short outing, maybe an hour at the most, because I got some stuff I need to deal with. But so with Variety, Disney's harsh new reality, costly film flops, creative struggles, and a shrinking box office. So, for the past decade, Disney has been the Teflon studio, remarkably adept at withstanding the tectonic changes impacting the film industry and well fortified by its arsenal of properties such as Marvel, Lucasfilm, and Pixar. But this year, the long reigning titan of the box office has shown cracks as four of its biggest releases from those brands and others have struggled in theaters. There was the dispiriting release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, a rare Marvel movie likely to lose tens of millions. The Little Mermaid, a remake of the 1989 animated classic that fell drastically short of expectations. Elemental, an original story that tried and failed to recapture Pixar's magic. And most recently, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, a nearly $300 million investment in one of cinema's most venerable franchises, which no longer appears to have the same hold on today's audiences. On paper, these films seemed like they had all the makings of huge hits, but somehow the Disney sparkle was lacking this time in terms of filling movie theater seats. Barring a miracle or a sudden surge of interest in Haunted Mansion, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 looks like it'll be the studio's biggest earner of the year with 835 million. It's the first time since 2014, except for the pandemic-stricken years of 2020 and 2021, that Disney won't have a movie that reaches 1 billion. It also marks a shift from 2022, which saw the studio release not only hits like Black Panther: Wakanda Forever and Doctor Strange: Multiverse of Madness, but also Avatar: The Way of Water, the third highest grossing film in history. Even if that's the case, Disney still far outranks the competition in terms of market share in 2023, commanding 37% of the industry's revenue. So Disney brings in over a third of all revenue in Hollywood. Wow. Universal is close behind at 31%, but ticket sales for the films it has produced have been more earthbound, especially compared to the last pre COVID year when Disney fielded a record 7 movies that crossed the $1 billion mark in 2019. In many cases, reviews for recent releases haven't been standout, with critics being particularly scathing about Quantum Mania and openly questioning the need for a fifth indie adventure. Audiences have been kinder, giving these movies respectable ratings on Rotten Tomatoes and CinemaScore. There are other issues bedeviling the Magic Kingdom these days. Because of its all tentpole, all the time strategy, Disney's movies each require production budgets of at least 200 million plus marketing costs of roughly 100 million. This means the studio's films have a higher benchmark than its rivals to break even at the box office. In the past, those budgets were justified with movies that crossed 1 billion worldwide with ease. Those price tags are riskier in today's box office landscape, with China's dollars no longer a guarantee due to tensions with the West and changing tastes. Russia, another major market, is entirely cut off from Hollywood movies after its invasion of Ukraine. As a result, the international box office has diminished to a shadow of its former self, and that has major consequences for Disney's profitability. To be fair, every studio is grappling with these punishing realities as the box office remains down roughly 20% from pre pandemic times. But Disney has historically enjoyed such a track record of success, and its issues are casting a spell over the movie business. Anything Disney threw out in 2019 made a billion, says Jeff Bach, an analyst with exhibitor relations. Now it's more difficult than ever to release a film worldwide. The international landscape has changed. It's not close to back. The problem is that getting these costs under control will take time. Major movies take at least 3 or 4 years to develop, produce, and distribute, a lifetime in a fast changing industry. Even if Disney is serious about tightening its belt, it may not make a noticeable difference until 2026 or beyond. It takes a long time for a big ship like Disney to change course, says Paul Verna, principal analyst at Insider Intelligence. Some of these bloated budgets on 2023 releases reflect the tens of millions that were racked up from pandemic delays and enhanced COVID testing. That should ease as the pandemic becomes a less disruptive force, which should be a key source of cost savings. Beyond that, there are questions about where else Disney may save money. Will it be in marketing the movies it produces or in cutting back on special effects or other cinematic set pieces? You cut cost, you degrade the quality of the product, says Brandon Nispel, an equity research analyst with KeyBank Capital Markets. If you spend less, do people like the movies you are making less? And how much and how fast can you start cutting? Well, I mean, they've already done that. We've all heard the complaints about the special effects and how lackluster they've been over the last couple of years, partly because they're delays caused by COVID and then rushing to get these things done. Now they say they're going to be cutting their schedule and releasing fewer properties in order to put, to focus more on quality rather than quantity. But as I said, I think when I reported on that back like around the beginning of the year, I'm not sure quantity or I'm not sure that quality to them is going to be the same thing I think of as quality. But whatever. The turn in fortunes isn't only due to market conditions, but also a mix of creative shortfalls and outsized attention on streaming. Disney's banner year in 2019, with the releases of Avengers Endgame, Lion King, Frozen 2, and more, came before Disney Plus launched and squashed the need for repeat viewings in theaters. With Endgame, for example, people went to the movies 3, 4, even 5 times to watch the epic blockbuster that bid adieu to some of Marvel's biggest heroes. Now there's less of a need to make multiple trips to the multiplex. Moviegoers can wait a matter of months or less for a film to land on streaming and satisfy the need for a rewatch. Exactly. People have become conditioned to expect that things will quickly appear on Disney Plus, says Neil Macker, a senior equity analyst for Morningstar Research. The theatrical movie business has been in decline for a while, and the pandemic accelerated it. Yep, I agree with that. Pixar has suffered the most from that mindset, analysts believe. The animation empire has been struggling since the onset of COVID, when several of its titles were sent directly to Disney Plus and trained family audiences to watch its movies at home. It's re entering the theatrical ring with heightened competition in the animation space from Illumination and Sony Pictures Animation. And those companies spend a fraction of Pixar's budget to bring the animated adventures to life. Universal's Super Mario Brothers movie, which is expected to be the year's highest-grossing film with more than 1.3 billion in revenue, cost 100 million to bring to life. That's roughly half of what Pixar shelled out for Elemental, which has yet to crack 200 million globally. Rival studios believe that Disney's animated efforts have become too twee and lack the more populist edge of Mario or Paramount's upcoming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot. Pixar is becoming an anemic brand, notes Verna. It's fallen so far from the days in which anything it released would blow the doors off. Star Wars 2 has lost its luster in theaters as the franchise is set in a galaxy far, far away, has found repeated success on Disney Plus with series like The Mandalorian and Andor. Was Andor really that big a success? Uh, but following the 2019 release of The Rise of Skywalker, Lucasfilm's efforts to get another trilogy off the ground have proceeded in fits and starts, with several high-profile projects being announced only to disappear into limbo. Disney has planted 3 Star Wars films on the release calendar in 26 and 27, but hasn't revealed any details about those movies. Quote, I'll believe there's a new Star Wars movie when I'm seated in the theater and seeing the opening crawl, says Josh Spiegel, a freelance film critic who specializes in Disney. There have been so many false starts. As a sprawling media conglomerate, Disney is facing issues on all fronts. Bob Iger, who returned as CEO after a brief hiatus and displaced his successor, Bob Chapek, is simultaneously battling Wall Street's unrest over the unprofitability of Disney Plus, concerns that Disney Parks businesses may have alienated customers with its higher prices and other things, and a rise in cord cutting that's imperiling its cable properties like ESPN. These are all doing more to depress Disney's price share or share price, which is down nearly 7% year over year than the struggles with its latest movies. Quote, streaming was positioned as the greatest business ever, and it didn't live up to the hype, says Nispel. Disney's losing more money than people thought it would, and the market became saturated more quickly than people expected. At the same time, the ground is shifting under linear TV, and the parks business that had been a cash cow hasn't fully recovered from the pandemic. Those are bigger problems. And yet, Disney's film business has long been an important stabilizing force, with the studio dwarfing the competition. And there's been a very successful formula that Disney has deployed, not so much leaning into nostalgia as diving in head first, which may no longer be as effective. Live action remakes of classics such as Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, and The Jungle Book were gold mines, even as those films were criticized by some as shot for shot remakes of the originals. At that time, the Disney name alone was enough to cut the noise in a crowded market. In the lackluster global turnout for The Little Mermaid, but the lackluster global turnout for The Little Mermaid is a sign that brand familiarity is no longer the ticket to get people into theaters. And the failure of the latest Ant-Man indicates the studio may need to do more or be more judicious in the sequels it decides to back. That's an issue because the studio has found less success in launching new original franchises other than Frozen. Disney desperately needs to create something new, Spiegel says. It does a good job at cannibalizing itself. They remake their movies and echo what they've done in the past. At a certain point, that won't be there won't be a whole lot for them to echo. More than its competitors, Disney can withstand some of its movies functioning as loss leaders. In addition to racking up ticket sales, the studio's films are designed to boost interest in toys and theme parks. So although The Little Mermaid barely floated past the 500 million mark, the return of Ariel is helping to sell themed Legos, backpacks, dolls, bedding, and nail polish. The same goes for underperforming Marvel adventures like Ant-Man, which brings an influx of interest to Avengers Campus, a Marvel Cinematic Universe themed area at the Disney California Adventure Park. They may not make it at the box office, but Disney will make up for it in merchandise sales and the longevity of the property. Will they, though? That's a lot different than Paramount or Sony, who need to make all their money back at the box office. I mean, I'm not so convinced of that. It's not like Marvel and Star Wars merch is flying off the shelves exactly. But I find it interesting that when they talk about Indiana Jones, where was it? Yeah, here it is. So Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, one of cinema's most venerable franchises, no longer appears to have the same hold on today's audiences. And I mean, the way they say it, they seem to be implying that people didn't go because it's an old franchise, and that's the problem. Basically people aren't interested in indie anymore, and that's why this movie failed. And, look, I can't sit here and say 100% that that's wrong, but I think if the movie were good, people would have gone. I don't think it isn't because they're tired of indie. I think it's, well, for other reasons. I mean, we know why. We all know why. Okay, that's enough of that. Why don't I move along here? Okay, so here's another one. So this is something caught my eye recently because they talk in the story about how expensive the films are, but it turns out some of these Disney movies, they may be more expensive than we hear. So this is from Forbes. Star Wars: Force Awakens becomes the most expensive movie ever made. So Star Wars: The Force Awakens has become the most expensive movie ever made with a total budget of 533.2 million, according to a recent filing. The 2015 flick was the first Star Wars movie made by Disney and was released 3 years after the studio's $4 billion acquisition of Lucasfilm, which owns the rights to the sci fi franchise. Force Awakens rebooted the series by pairing rising stars Daisy Ridley and John Boyega with Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and the late Carrie Fisher, who shot the fame in the first Star Wars film 37 years earlier. The reboot was a hit with fans and grossed 2.1 billion worldwide, according to industry analyst Box Office Mojo. It has now come to light exactly how much weight Disney threw behind it. Mindful of the fact that it would need a blockbuster budget for visual effects and the salaries of the stars, Disney devised an ingenious way to make money back on the movie. Instead of shooting it in the United States, Disney decided to film at Pinewood Studios in the United Kingdom. This enabled it to benefit from the UK government's film tax relief scheme, which allows production companies to receive a cash reimbursement of up to 25% of the cost they incur in the country. I didn't know about that. So much at stake, Disney didn't take any chances and got endorsement from the UK government right from the start. In 2014, Treasury Secretary George Osborne proudly announced that Pinewood would not just be home to The Force Awakens, but also its two sequels. This will mean more jobs and more investment, he said, and it's great news for people working at Pinewood Studios, from the set designers to the carpenters. And in a way, I mean, that is very fitting because, as most Star Wars fans know, the original Star Wars movies were filmed there. At least, I mean, Star Wars, the first one and Empire were filmed over there. Um, I don't think Jedi was, though. I think Jedi was filmed in California, I think, or at least most of it was. With so much, where am I here? Okay, yeah. So another consequence of shooting in the UK is that it puts the finances of the film under the spotlight. Movie budgets are usually a closely guarded secret, as studios tend to absorb the cost of individual pictures in their overall expenses. However, the cost of movies made in the UK are consolidated in single companies, which file annual financial statements showing the cash reimbursement, headcount, salaries, total expenses, and more. Production companies have code names so that they don't raise attention when filing for permits to shoot off site. The Disney subsidiary behind The Force Awakens is named Foodles Production after the cafe next to the San Rafael, California headquarters of Kerner Optical, the original practical effects division of Lucasfilm's Industrial Light and Magic's visual effects firm. A condition of receiving the cash reimbursement is that the companies must be responsible for everything from pre-production to delivery of the movie and paying for services relating to the finished film. Uh, it it's one of the reasons why Foodles is still booking costs on its financial statements 8 years after The Force Awakens was released. Another reason is that the companies often file the statements around a year after the period they cover. This is why the latest results for Foodles were filed last month and cover the year December 31st, 2021. During that time, the company spent 3.1 million, bringing the total spent on The Force Awakens to a massive 533.2 million, which is 74% more than the media had estimated. Disney didn't actually spend more than it forecast, as the financials say that, quote, at the year end, the estimated total cost was within budget, unquote. Salaries alone came to a total of 21.5 million, with staff numbers peaking at 258 without even including freelancers and self-employed workers who make up the majority of the crew. But is that salaries? I mean, is that everybody? Is that just the crew, or does that include the actors? Because I remember, it seems like I remember when Harrison Ford signed on, like he was making like 30 million himself or something like that. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong. As the graph below shows, the closest competitor to The Force Awakens was 2019's Rise of Skywalker, which cost 503.6 million to make. At the other end of the spectrum are the three Star Wars spin-offs that were also made in the UK. Rogue One is a prequel to the first Star Wars film, whilst Solo tells the origin of Ford's Han Solo character. However, the cheapest Star Wars production Disney has made in the UK is Andor, the hit streaming series. Is it that big a hit, really? I wonder. The hit streaming series, which premiered in September and stars Mexican actor Diego Luna as the eponymous hero. At a total cost of 242.4 million, its budget was less than half of The Force Awakens, though it doesn't stop there. And yeah, they have a bit of a graph here. And yeah, so Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker are much more. So Last Jedi was 362.6 million. Surprisingly low. Or the other two are surprisingly high, I guess, depending on how you look at it. As we recently revealed in the Sunday Times newspaper, Disney has received a staggering 389 million in reimbursements from the UK government, with 86.6 million of it paid for The Force Awakens, bringing its net cost to 446.6 million. However, even taking this into account, The Force Awakens still takes center stage as the most expensive of the six Star Wars productions that Disney has made in the UK, as can be seen on the graph below. Uh, Puts The Force Awakens head and shoulders above Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, which is widely to believe to be the most expensive movie ever made. It crowned recent lists from Collider and Screen Rant, thanks to a budget which came to 240.7 million when Forbes revealed it in 2014. Since then, it has increased to 324 million, but this is still a far cry from the sum spent on The Force Awakens, and the same goes for the net costs of On Stranger Tides, which come to 297.9 million after its 26.2 million reimbursement is deducted. Technically, the two latest installments in Disney's Avengers superhero saga cost more to make than even The Force Awakens. Both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame were made by Assembled Productions, which spent a total of 1.2 billion since it was incorporated in 2016, according to its latest financial statements. However, as both films were made by the same production company, it isn't possible to tell precisely how much was spent on each one. In contrast, analysis of 39 sets of financial statements reveals that Disney has spent a total of 2.3 billion making the six Star Wars movie productions in the UK. That really does make it a force to be reckoned with. See, force to be reckoned with. Do you get it? Isn't that clever? Oh God. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we're finding out that we're not always really hearing exactly the truth about how much these films cost. And there's another story where, let me find it. Come on. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So there's a story here. This is on Bounding into Comics, and this is about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So we're finding out that movie cost quite a bit more than was put out. Let's bring this up. So Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness reportedly cost nearly 100 million more than the original estimated production budget. A new report claims that Marvel Studios' Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness cost nearly 100 million more than the original budget estimate. This new report from Forbes states that the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness cost two, if I have to say the title again, cost 94.5 million more than the film's original estimated budget of 200 million. It's nearly $100 million increase in the production budget comes after newly released financial statements in the United Kingdom revealed an additional 135.3 million was spent on the film's production. This additional 135.3 million was then added to previous reports that noted the film cost 213.7 million. That brought the total cost to 349 million. However, the United Kingdom reimbursed 54.5 million, meaning the net cost for the film was 294.5. Come on. According to the numbers, Doctor Strange 2 grossed 411.3 million at the domestic box office and another 540.8 million internationally for a global total of 952.2 million, nearly a billion. When the film came out, the box office analyst OMB Reviews used the original 200 million production to predict that the film would bring in a considerable margin of over 200 million. However, given the increased cost, that number has also significantly declined, albeit it still appears to have raked in enough to be profitable. With a 294.5 million budget, the break-even point of the film clocks in at about 736.25 million using a 2.5 calculation. Typically, you multiply the production budget by 1.5 to find the total cost, which includes the production budget along with marketing. For Doctor Strange 2, that comes to around 441.7 million. The next thing you do is you have to factor in the theater's take on the box office. They typically take 40%, while the studios bring back 60%. This obviously can fluctuate depending on the deals the studios have with various theaters. However, the 60-40 split is standard, albeit some analysts have switched to a 50-50 split. Well, I know don't Disney takes more than standard, I don't they? Because it seems like I remember years ago hearing that they were really kind of strong arming the theaters and basically demanding a bigger take of the box office in return for the theater getting their movie. Basically saying you got to let us have more of the box office or you're not going to get our movie. Maybe they're not. Maybe post pandemic they aren't doing that anymore. Maybe they don't have the leverage to do it. I don't know. Film costs have become a major thorn in the Walt Disney Company's side in recent years as their films are no longer bringing in the massive box office hauls they once had. Former Marvel exec Ike Perlmutter claimed in April he was let go from the company specifically because he was trying to keep the costs low. Perlmutter told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "I have no doubt that my termination was based on fundamental differences in business between my thinking and Disney leadership because I care about return on investment," unquote. He elaborated, all they talk about is box office, box office. I care about the bottom line. I don't care how big the box office is. Only people in Hollywood talk about box office. As for the Walt Disney Company's claim he was let go amid their downsizing efforts to cut costs, promoter disputed it, saying, quote, it was merely a convenient excuse to get rid of a longtime exec who dared to challenge the company's way of doing business, unquote. While Perlmutter claims he was let go because he was trying to have the company focus on return on investment rather than box office grosses, the company's CEO, Bob Iger, has admitted the company's film production costs have gotten out of hand. During the company's quarter one earnings result call, Iger answered a question from Michael Nathanson of Moffett Nathanson saying, quote, additionally, we're going to lean more into our franchises, our core franchises, and our brands. I talked about curation and general entertainment. We have to be better at curating the Disney, the Pixar, the Marvel, and the Star Wars of it all, unquote. And which I don't even know why I bother to say because they're doing that already anyway. I mean, they've been doing that for years. I mean, when is the last time they did something that wasn't a sequel or a remake of, a Disney, a Pixar, a Marvel, or a Star Wars? Um, Let me think. I mean, well, Pixar hasn't. Pixar's done some original stuff, but it's mostly failed. Elementals failed. Was was Strange World a Pixar thing? Maybe just a Disney thing. I'm not sure. And of course, reduce costs on everything that we make. While we are extremely proud of what's on the screen, it's gotten to a point where it's extraordinarily expensive. We want all the quality. We want the quality on the screen, but we have to look at what they cost us, he added. That and it looks like they will also be creating less of their big franchise films. As reported by the Hollywood Reporter, Iger said to what is it? Okay. We have to look at it as Marvel is not necessarily the volume. Wait, how is this? This is worded really weirdly. So we have to look at Marvel is not necessarily the volume of Marvel's storytelling, but how many times we go back to the well on certain characters. Yeah, that needed to be edited. That needed some proofreading. He elaborated, quote, sequels typically work well for us, but you do need a third or a fourth, for instance. Is it time to turn to other characters? There's nothing in any way inherently off in terms of the Marvel brand. I think we just have to look at what characters and stories we are mining, unquote. Okay, so yeah, I mean, so you have to wonder with all these big budget movies coming out, particularly with Disney, how much do they really cost? Because it's obvious we can't trust the budget numbers anymore. And of course, that calls into question like how profitable are these films? Disney may have lost even more money than we've realized, which hey, doesn't break my heart at all. And I think that, Disney's not the only one that is having to be concerned with this. I think Warner Brothers is very concerned about cost and about finances. I mean, we've seen that with how they've had Zaslav come in and cut productions and cut budgets and even cut departments. And I think one of the aims, they haven't said this out loud, but I think one of the aims going forward is to make DC movies, but make them maybe cheaper. I think that's a I think that played a big part in why a lot of the Snyderverse actors are not being brought back. Why Cavill's not coming back, why Gal Gadot is not coming back, why Affleck is not coming back because they're so expensive. I remember hearing back around the time, it was around the time that the whole reboot was announced. And we heard that Man of Steel 2, that Cavill was not coming back and Man of Steel 2 was being canceled and all that. And that Wonder Woman 3 was not happening either. And at that time, I remember we were hearing that Cavill and Gadot both would make somewhere in the area of about 20 to 30 million to do another film. Well, that's a lot. And even with a movie that costs 200 million, I mean, that's nearly 1/6 of your budget right there on one person, just to hire one actor. So I think one of the reasons they showed those actors the door, I don't think it's the only reason, but I think part of the reason, a big part of it was they want to go cheaper, because you can then get a new actor, a relative unknown, and hire them and, you know, sign them to one of these contracts where they're going to be making films for you for the next decade, for like 6, 7, 8 films, and you'll defray the cost out over all those movies, and it becomes less expensive for you. Okay, let's move on to Indiana Jones. And I would point out, I've posted my review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny on my channel about 5, 6 days ago. So I hope you will check that out. Let me bring this up here. Where am I at? So we're at 7:35. I'll go maybe another 20 minutes or so. Okay. So James Mangold derides fans as divisive, of course, for not liking his deconstruction of Indiana Jones and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So tired of this crap. So, speaking with the Hollywood Reporter, Mangold was asked by Brian Davids, quote, "Life is filled with peaks and valleys, and I appreciate when my fictional heroes, such as Indy, have their own ups and downs. So why does a segment of the audience seem to want these legacy characters to be infallible? I just can't figure out why anyone would want such little drama," unquote. Okay, well, this is disingenuous. First of all, I don't think Indy's ever been infallible, but it's not that we're wanting that. But he's conflating infallible with like pathetic. It's the same with all these stories we're seeing where they're taking some beloved male character, whether it's Han Solo or Luke or Nick Fury. We're seeing that in Secret Invasion or Picard on Star Trek Picard. Um, I mean, I'm sure I could come up with other examples if I thought about it. It took some time, but they defend these things by saying, well, we want to see a flawed character and all that. But it's one thing to see a character who's flawed. It's another to see a character who is basically broken and is being portrayed as pathetic and kind of washed up. It's not there are degrees. There are degrees of flaw, there are degrees of infallibility or fallibility, and they just kind of go to this one extreme and then basically say that anything that's not that is, oh well, that's, you just want them to be perfect or what. No, that's not what it is. Mangold replied, well, there's a point where these characters become symbols more than characters, and so there becomes this anxiety that if you examine the humanity of a hero, you somehow weaken them. He continued, and honestly, I can't speak for how fans relate and wrestle with these questions in relation to other movies, but certainly in relation to mine, I think your question almost has my answer built into it. I mean, I think you're in a sense already addressing it. Good drama gives a hero a problem. If a movie is about a beautiful hero who is capable of anything and is virtually indestructible and is without any personal issues or concerns, then you just have a fashion video with action. I am a fan of starting a character in one place and to go to another, Mangold elaborated. Movies are a continuum. By definition, in drama, a character starts in one place and ends up in another. Mangold then accused critics of his deconstruction of being divisive when it was his and Lucasfilm's choice to deconstruct Indiana Jones in the first place. He said, so if people want to be divisive in the age of social media, they can focus on where a character starts as opposed to where they end, or they can focus on where they end as opposed to where they start. In reality, for Harrison, who's playing this character, he's tracing an arc and he's changing through the whole picture. So it all depends on where you're landing and where you're pointing your finger on that timeline, he concluded. Well, yeah, yeah, Indiana Jones certainly changes through this film, sometimes from scene to scene, in terms of his temperament and his behavior. And I think that betrays how this movie was reshot, possibly multiple times. Ironically, Mangold previously admitted he was deconstructing Indiana Jones and that moviegoers Moviegoers would have to, quote, readjust and retool their brains for this guy, unquote. In a previous interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he explained how the film would transition from Indiana Jones in his prime to a much older Indiana Jones. It reminds the audience of the contrast between a hero in his prime and a hero at 70. We're not relying solely on the audience's memory of the previous films. It reminds everyone what he's done, what he survived, and what he's accomplished. By showing him in his most hardy and then finding him at 70 in New York City, it produces for the audience a kind of wonderful whiplash of how they're going to have to adjust and retool their brains for this guy. His past is a live memory for the audience, hanging over a man who's now living with anonymity in a world that no longer cares or recognizes the things he felt so deeply about, Mangold elaborated. He then concluded, you're left with a multi layered perception of his character, both what he was and what he is, and how the world is different between the first 20 minutes of the movie. This is not the first time Mangold has lashed out and made accusations against fans expressing their concerns. Mangold infamously threw a temper tantrum when YouTuber Matt Cadish shared his concerns about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny back in June of 2021. And I won't rehash all that, but yeah, and I'm not really that familiar with Matt Cadish, but he posted this tweet here where he pointed out that Steven Spielberg isn't directing, Kathleen Kennedy was producing, Harrison Ford was 78, so basically said don't expect this to be very good, and it turned into a big spat with Mangold. Which really, I don't know what Mangold hoped to accomplish by that, but whatever. I'm not going to elaborate on all that again. The film had an abysmal opening weekend, only bringing in 60.3 million domestically. So far, the film has only grossed 102.3 million domestically and another 69.5 million internationally for a global gross of 171.8 million. The film is expected to lose the Walt Disney Company and Lucasfilm more than 250 million due to its massive $300 million budget. Ain't that a shame? And that's another thing is that it's one thing to deconstruct a character to explore that character. It's and to make that character fallible and all that simply for purposes of story and for drama. It's another to do it because you want to basically introduce this other character who's going to basically outshine the character you like. And it's just disingenuous. You're doing it for these reasons that you're not admitting to. All right. um okay, there's another one with Mangold. I won't go into that again. I'm really kind of disappointed with that because when Mangold, I think Mangold's a really good director. He's done some excellent films. I love Copland. I think it's really underrated. I don't think it gets the attention it deserves. And I've liked some of his other films. I thought that 310 to Yuma, for instance, is solid. And Logan, of course, is good. Now, I would say that was an example where the first of all, it was done back before this deconstruction of the aging hero trope had been done over and over and over. So it was still somewhat kind of fresh and wasn't sort of it hadn't been overdone at that point. And also you didn't feel like in that movie it was being done, you weren't diminishing his character so that the female character, the girl, I forget her name, his daughter, quote unquote, so that she could be the star of the movie. You never got that feel for it. At least I never did. Unlike, say, in Indiana Jones, where that's exactly what it feels like. Okay, here's one. So we'll talk about Armor Wars, which it's gone back and forth. It's been a streaming show. I think it was a movie, then it was a streaming show, then it was a movie again. Okay, so Marvel's Armor Wars film to spin out from Secret Invasion, and we'll see the return of Justin Hammer. After being stuck in development hell for over a decade, the rumor mill has finally gleaned its apparent first word regarding Marvel's planned Armor Wars film. including insight into both its general plot and its Iron Man related cast of characters. And this is based on a storyline from Iron Man. This was mid 80s. I'm guessing this was around 85 or so, where Tony Stark discovered, there's a whole host of characters in Marvel who have high-tech suits and other types of high-tech uh, advanced technology. And there's a storyline where Tony found out that a lot of this stuff was being made with his technology, which had been pirated. And so he went on this he made it his mission to track down all these items that had been made with his technology and destroy them or appropriate them or what have you. Originally announced as a television series in 2011 before being upgraded to a full-blown cinematic outing in late 2022. Details regarding Armor Wars have been practically non-existent, with the only real information communicated about the project throughout this entire period being Don Cheadle's confirmation that he would be returning as War Machine and Marvel's constant reassurance that it was, in fact, still in development. Marvel has been reluctant to outright confirm the project's base plot, leaving outlets to simply guess that it would follow the late 80s comic book arc of the same name. And all right, so penned by David Michelinie and Bob Layton and featuring art by Mark Bright and Barry Windsor Smith. The original Armor Wars storyline saw Tony Stark make the harrowing discovery that the proprietary technology that makes up his Iron Man armors had leaked into the wild, resulting in numerous villains co-opting his work to wreak havoc upon the world. Seeing it as a failure of his attempt, Stark responds to the theft by going on the warpath against Marvel Universe's many tech-based villains, dragging Rhodey along for the entire destructive ride, all in the hopes of finding out who is behind this dangerous development. Unfortunately, thanks to the brutal fervor with which he throws himself into his mission, Stark soon finds himself coming into conflict with both the Avengers and the US government. Regardless, the armored Avenger continues to put everything on the line in service of putting an end to the problem. A gamble which eventually pays off when he discovers Justin Hammer to be the man behind the curtain. And as you'll notice, if you can see here in the panels, Justin Hammer is a significantly different character in the comics. In the comics, Justin Hammer's more of an elderly guy. I mean, I don't know how old, but I put him in his 60s, maybe even 70. And in the comics, he's much more like a Bond villain. That's very much what he feels like. However, now that Marvel has recommitted itself to Armor Wars, it seems like the film is finally starting to bear fruit. The supposed progress report on the upcoming MCU film was first whispered on July 5th, courtesy of Comic Book News' Alex Perez, who gleaned the bevy of supposed information from the outlet's own insider sources. According to said sources, Armor Wars will, in fact, attempt to adapt the aforementioned Iron Man story for the MCU, with Rhodey standing in for the now deceased Tony Stark. The catalyst of these events will reportedly be the Department of Damage Control, a department of the U.S. government created to secure all superhero-related technology and debris in the wake of their battles, a job they can be seen undertaking in their first appearance in Spider-Man Homecoming. However, in the wake of the events of Avengers Endgame, the U.S. government has found itself growing more and more concerned with the rise of superpowered individuals, and more specifically, the penchant for vigilante justice. This fear eventually comes to a head thanks to the events of Secret Invasion, as thanks to the Skrulls' attempts to overtake Earth, the powers that be will finally find the justification to greenlight the, quote, Iron Army, a contingent of armor-clad personnel meant to serve as an organized response to any super threat. Of course, lacking the technology and resources to develop the necessary equipment themselves, the government outsources the task to the DODC, Damage Control, ordering them to lock down all of Tony's technological creations, including his former military weapons platforms, as well as the entirety of his Iron Man armors, for their own use. Unsurprisingly, these best laid plans are soon hijacked by two villains with their own axes to grind against Earth's mightiest heroes. Julia Louis Dreyfus's Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine and Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer. For the cosmic book news sources, Hammer will be freed from prison by de Fontaine before being hired to helm the Iron Army project. Speaking of villains, sources noted that the ranks of the Iron Army may be filled out by some of Iron Man's classic comic book foes, though sadly, as of writing, they cannot outright confirm which villains are being considered for a promotion to the big leagues. Further, it was noted that while the idea of having Ultron return during the events of Armor Wars has been considered, a final determination of this plot thread has yet to be made. On the topic of returning characters, the outlet's insiders also disclosed that Rhodey will not be fighting this fight on his own. He will apparently receive support from a number of armored heroes and returning Iron Man characters. We all know who that's going to be. As of writing, the only such character confirmed to be making appearances is Riri Ironheart Williams, as portrayed by actress Dominique Thorne. In terms of release dates, the Cosmic Book News claimed that they were able to confirm that Armor Wars will follow Fantastic Four in the MCU's chronological release schedule. As the debut of Marvel's first family is currently slated for May 2nd of 2025, this means that Armor Wars will slide into the studio's already claimed date of July 25th, 2025. With these admittedly subject to change thanks to the current ongoing writer's strike and the looming SAG-Aftra strike. Yeah, so it's kind of what I expected. Nothing, no real surprise here. Um, I personally am not that excited for it. I mean, I like the character of Rhodey well enough, but he ain't Tony Stark either. So I don't know. And I'm certainly not excited for Riri Williams as Ironheart. Um, I don't, and it'll be interesting to see how this does at the box office too. I keep thinking, when you keep hearing that, in the comics, they made Tony Stark into a hologram. He died at one point and he basically became a computer program, a hologram. And he was actually kind of like advising Ironheart early on, I believe. And I keep thinking that they'll do that, to bring Morton Downey Jr. back in some way. It wouldn't surprise me if they do that to help sell this thing. Okay, where I'm at, I'm at 7:52, almost an hour. Okay, I'll do one more. I do have this one Daredevil story, so let me hit that right quick, and then that'll be it. And again, this is on Bounding into Comics. So, original Daredevil stuntman says Marvel Studios, quote, told every person working on that show that they don't want Born Again to look anything like the Netflix series. In the latest disappointing but unsurprising confirmation that the studio has lost the plot when it comes to their take on The Man Without Fear, Marvel is reportedly going to great lengths to ensure that their upcoming Daredevil Born Again has absolutely no connection with the hero's previous Netflix series. Word of Marvel's outlook towards the upcoming Disney Plus series was first made public courtesy of professional Hollywood stuntman Chris Brewster, who most notably served as the stunt double for both Chris Evans in Captain America Winter Soldier and Charlie Cox in all three seasons of the original Daredevil during a June 21st appearance on the Ikuzo Unscripted podcast. Amidst a discussion regarding his time working on the fan favorite Marvel series, the co-host made note of the fact that Brewster would not be working on Born Again before going on to ask his guest whether or not his absence was, quote, something that he can change. Quote, because it seems, at least to me, that you are the go-to guy for Marvel stunt visuals, he added, making reference to the veteran stuntman's further studio credits as either a stunt coordinator or performer in Iron Man 3. Okay, a lot of Marvel stuff. I'm not going to list all of that. He's done a lot of Marvel stuff, though. Admitting that it's probably too late to change it now, the veteran stuntman further buried any hopes of his return by revealing that, quote, Marvel has told every person working on that show that they don't want Marvel Born Again to look anything like the Netflix Daredevil series, unquote. Met with shock and disappointment by Zakovich and his co-host Luka Vukic, Brewster admitted that he shared in their frustrations, asserting, quote, Trust me, not only did I work on the show, I was one of the biggest fans of the show. I think that the Marvel Netflix Daredevil was a masterpiece, unquote. Quote, I think that the casting was perfect, he explained. I think that every showrunner, every person who worked on that show was a genius. It was an incredible experience, and in my opinion, and like most people agree on, it was Marvel's best streaming show. Yes, I agree with that. I think that Trey and Vincent absolutely crushed it as their characters. Yes, they did. I think that every person who worked on the show absolutely nailed it. Sadly, while Brewster had nothing but praise to lavish upon Hornhead's Netflix adventures, he conversely lamented how, quote, I think that now that the MCU has taken over the character, they are really, really hurting it, unquote. Quote, if you watched She Hulk, they turned Daredevil into a cartoon, he said. It's all animated and it looks bad. I love CGI to enhance real movement, but if you don't have any real movement, it just becomes a cartoon. It's just CG. There's no weight to it. And what always made the action on Daredevil so good is that it was visceral, Brewster asserted. You felt what Charlie was feeling between his performance and just being in there in the action. And anything that you saw, we really did. We had to put somebody on a wire. When we needed something to enhance the movement, we would use CG, but it was never a cartoon. It was always live action, and you will never match the energy that live action has. So I think you know that She Hulk was a massive step down as far as the movement goes and the action. Echo isn't out yet, but I've heard it's just as bad. I'd heard they were going to Batgirl it because they weren't happy with it, and now they're doing reshoots and they're planning on airing it. But I think that could also do with the fact that there's a strike and there's not a lot of content they have right now. So they're like, well, we have it made already. So let's just put it out there anyway. Returning to the topic of Daredevil's Disney Plus outing, Brewster recalled, ultimately born again, I had no doubt that they were going to reach out to me. Charlie specifically requests me on everything. He always goes out of his way and fights for me to be there. And he asked them over and over to bring me in, and I never even got a phone call, unquote. Ironically, nobody who worked on seasons 1, 2, or 3 went back. He noted before, in the hopes of truly driving the point home, reiterating they really, truly don't want it to be anything like the Marvel Netflix Daredevil. So nobody that worked on the original series, other than the cast that they're bringing back, is coming back. So, I mean, that is it. It's going to be Charlie Cox, and you're going to have D'Onofrio as the Kingpin, and that's it. Everybody else is going to be new. There were some truly wonderful people who worked on that show, and I think they really added to the magic of that show. And I think that Marvel's making a big mistake. But what are you going to do? Notably, this is not the first time that Daredevil's upcoming change of character has been hinted at by those who involved with either his Netflix or Disney debuts. Speaking to the series direction during the 2022 D23 Expo, Cox himself revealed that Born Again, quote, is a season 1. It is not a season 4. So it's a whole new thing, which I think is the way to go. If you're going to do it again, do it differently. I haven't seen a script, he added. My feeling is based on the title Born Again. I think that the sense of it is a new beginning. It's going to be different. It's going to be totally different. It's going to be new stories and new ideas. The actor would further confirm this change in direction during a later interview with NME, asserting that this has to be a reincarnation. It has to be different. Otherwise, why are we doing it? My opinion is this character works best when he's geared towards a slightly more mature audience, he detailed to the magazine. My instinct is that on Disney Plus it will be dark, but it probably won't be as gory. Asked if he had any words for the many fans who found themselves disappointed by Born Again's decision to embrace a lighter tone, Cox replied, I would say to those people, we've already done that. Let's take the things that really worked and we broaden them, he continued. Can we appeal to a slightly younger audience without losing what we've learned about what works? Likewise, D'Onofrio told Newsweek earlier this year that Born Again is, quote, going to be very, very different than the Netflix show. And it's so exciting because what we're doing is quite something. Yeah, it's going to be something, I'll bet. I think it's something that people are not going to expect, he elaborated, but always with these Marvel old comic stories that are being revisited and reinvented. And the writers, the main thing is to answer the fans, to give them what they want, but try to be original in some way at the same time. And so that's what we're doing on the show, the actor detailed. It's definitely an original way to look at this, and it's really deep, really emotional. Uh-huh. So yeah, this comes as no surprise. They're gonna do an MCU number on this. It's gonna be goofy. It's gonna be silly. Now, in and of itself, I mean, Daredevil can be light in tone. Daredevil hasn't always been a dark, gritty character. He was very much kind of a Spider-Man knockoff in many ways. He was this acrobatic, wisecracking hero. Very early on. Then he became more just kind of a standard, sort of straightforward crime fighter. And then Frank Miller came in the late 70s, right at the end of the 70s, and took it in this grittier, sort of almost noir type direction. But the thing here is, I mean, because they say like we want to make it more family friendly, or basically that they're trying to make it lighter and fun for kids or something. That's not what they're going to be doing. I guarantee you. It's because they'll say that it's going to be lighter and funnier, but I can guarantee you there's probably going to be more sexual humor and more stuff that's inappropriate for kids, because that's what they did in She-Hulk. But the thing that aggravates me is I remember reading a story that because they've cast some new actresses for the show, and of course the speculation was, like, is this actress going to be Elektra, or is that actress going to be Karen Page? And of course, they're not going to be either one. And one of these actresses was being hired to be Dakota North. Now, Dakota North is an obscure Marvel character, female Marvel character who first appeared in like the early 80s. She's a detective. And I will bet you money that what they're going to do with this show is they're going to do the same thing with this show that they did with Loki, and with that female Loki, Sylvie or whatever her name is, and with Hawkeye and Kate Bishop, and with Moon Knight and that female character, whatever her name was. They're going to take this hero and give him a show, but it's really going to be kind of like a backdoor pilot, or really more of an origin story for this female character that's also there. And they're going to use this as a platform to spin Dakota North off into her own show. And she's basically going to be Daredevil's partner, and she'll be at least as capable as he is, if not more, even though she has no powers, and no special training like he does, but she'll be just as capable and just as effective in a fight, and keep up with him toe for toe, if not be better than him. And then after the show, they'll announce that, there's going to be a Dakota North streaming show. That's what's going to happen. All right, so I'm in an hour, so I am going to go ahead and call it there because, like I say, I've got other pressing stuff got to deal with. But I do want to thank those who tune in for the stream and also will listen on the rewatch. And I hope you will all have a good weekend. And so I'll have drill with my National Guard unit next weekend, so there will be no stream next weekend. So it'll be about 2 weeks before I do this again. But I hope to see you then. And till then, everyone have a good night.